I think the basic point that we make, the BAR's position as enunciated by the President, is that we are calling for the ratification of Convention 189, right?
Yes.
As well as the other issue that we are taking up is that there should be regulations in place. And thirdly is, as all of you are aware, we have this ASEAN Declaration on Migrant Workers. They're supposed to come up with a binding framework because the declaration is made declaratory. That is the third call that the President has made. So following on that, you can ask the President and Tan Sri any other views.
I think for me, specifics, I would be very attracted to the idea of how we can get rid of this nomenclature servant, this domestic servant. Is there a possibility of having a collective sense of not wanting to use that word again? Can the press start this kind of campaign with our support? Don't talk about servants anymore. I think this is a very pejorative word in our time and age. We shouldn't be using this word. And of course, for me, we cannot go from conference to conference, discussion group to discussion group. We've got to deal with, I think, the idea of reposing somebody with to be the mechanism to look at these things would be good. I think this is something that I think Suakam was said here. That everybody could go and make sure that things are looked at dispassionately, without fear or favor, and that the people who are affected can be confident that this mechanism, this unit you have, would be able to treat them fairly and in concern with whatever international statutes and principles there are. And the other thing is, of course, the mind of our society itself. Has it not improved enough to be able to deal with treating people better? Suakam, Bar Council, we can do all sorts of things, even the government. But the sheer cruelty of some people in Malaysia boggles the imagination. And that it must come from mothers and wives also. Not just husbands, but mothers and wives. That's a terrifying thought, that you treat people so badly. Surely everybody has that responsibility. Everybody carries a kind of sense of sin for being part of a society that does this kind of thing. No amount of work by Bar Council or government or Suakam can make any difference. If our society, our family units treat people like that, like animals, this cannot go on.
So, what do you think is missing from? What do you think is missing from how we look at domestic workers today? I mean, there are many things, but what would your main? What would you like to work on first? Is it coming up with a set of laws that restrict people from employing foreign workers or criminalizing abuse and that sort of thing?
For me, I'm attracted to the ability of our government, our country, like some other countries, that the law must protect everybody, and that the law must be able to be enforced and applied to everybody. I mean, in some countries outside, there are so many laws, but one way or another, the law will get to you if you break that rule.
So is your concern more enforcement of the law that we already have?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the most important is public vigilance. If there's no public vigilance, this is not going to happen. But the law must be able to be enforced. I mean, in Malaysia sometimes there are exceptions to the rule. That doesn't work. There should be no way that anybody who's irritated people or tortured people will ever get out from being penalized for doing all those things. But you see, some countries, one way or another, the law is applied. It may take a long time, but they will catch you. And this is the way it should be in Malaysia.
just to give you a context as well, globally there are something like 67 million domestic workers. Yeah? Of that number, about 60 million domestic workers have no legal protection. And out of that 60 million, is something like 55 million are women. That is the state of affairs of domestic workers. And we have to remember one thing, domestic workers does not only mean migrant domestic workers. Yeah, also Malaysian domestic workers. There are a lot of people in Malaysia who are involved in domestic work, working in somebody's home, working as a gardener full-time or a driver. All these are domestic work, which is not regulated. Yeah? And the migrant domestic workers globally, that number is about 11.5 million or thereabouts. Okay, that is the state of affairs. So if one looks, the majority of domestic workers are actually workers from that nation state. We tend to always think of domestic workers equals to migrant domestic workers. Yeah, there's a large number of domestic workers who are locals as well. The problem in Malaysia is this. We have the basic employment law, that is the Employment Act. The Employment Act defines the pejorative word that Tan Sri said, domestic servants. Domestic servants are defined in the Employment Act. But other than the right to receive wages, all other protections in the Employment Act does not apply to domestic workers. They are expressly excluded by law. The right to hours of work, the issues on hours of work, weekly rest day, these issues of deduction and all these other protections which any normal worker enjoys, none of the domestic workers enjoy those rights because our law excludes them.
What is the logic behind that?
It's always because they have felt that the situation of domestic work is different from normal work. What the convention has said, the convention on on domestic workers says, is this: you must not, as Tan Sri correctly said, domestic workers are neither servants nor members of the family or second-class workers. They are workers. Domestic work is work. Although there are special characteristics, one understands. Taking into account, even the convention takes that into account, taking that into account, that there are special characteristics in the sense that a lot of domestic workers actually live within families, right? A large number of them live within families, some live out of families and come in part-time. But if they do that work as their full-time vocation and that is their work, then legal protections must be in place in terms of hours of work, the responsibilities on standby, and so on and so forth. Adequate accommodation, adequate food. All those protections have to be built in and provided for. We have, of course, I think has been said by the President, we have made some progress of coming up with our guidelines, which was just launched about 2 months ago. It's work in progress, we understand, but what we need is, taking into account, is to have regulations. Regulations will have force of law. Guidelines are merely guidelines advisory to a person. So how do you protect, how do you ensure the well-being of domestic workers, not only migrant domestic workers, our own domestic workers? We all know cases of people in rural areas or people from poor families who work in other people's homes as doing domestic work, and they have no protections. So you must have some sort of regulation. There was a regulation that was already drafted. Civil society has commented on those regulations. That was about 2 years ago. Until today, that regulation has not seen the light of day.
What's it called? What was that regulation?
Domestic Workers Regulations, 2014, was it, Sumi?
It's in the speech.
Yeah. The regulation was, Sumi, could someone get Tan Sri's speech as well? Yeah. So the Domestic Workers Regulations has been prepared, but it has never moved forward. They then move forward with these guidelines. We believe that, this is 2014. It's called the Regulations, in brackets, Terms and Conditions of Employment of Domestic Servants 2014. First and foremost, we disagree with the title, of course. It should be domestic workers. The government itself uses this pejorative term of domestic servants, so that's the regulation that has been drafted, but it has not moved forward.
So, talking about, the Cambodian government announcing its decision to stop sending workers here, and, the same thing with Indonesia, coinciding with Domestic Workers Day, UN and actually the International Labour Organization released a report saying that so many years after the ban, there are still workers going back with claims of being raped, being, mistreated, and sometimes to their death. What is our response to that? And although we know that possibly they may not send them again, what can we do to ensure that Vietnam, Myanmar, all these people will continue to be safe in our country, besides the whole regulation?
If I can just reiterate the points made by Dr. Rama and also Tan Sri earlier. I think what is important is, first of all, is the recruitment process. There should be proper recruitment, ethical recruitment process, at both sides, from the countries sending the workers and also in Malaysia where we receive the workers. On both sides, there must be proper recruitment process, proper contracts drawn and given to these workers, which can subsequently be enforced. Following that is, there should also be proper complaints mechanism and enforcement of these complaints. So there must be an avenue where workers can come, where they have issues, they can freely come and lodge their complaints without fear. And then there must be positive action from the government to ensure that their rights are protected. So the enforcement part is also equally important. So I think if we have these in place, then the rights of foreign workers especially, and also like Dr. Ramos mentioned earlier, also our local domestic workers' rights are also ensured.
Out of curiosity, do we still have maybe a number of unregistered Cambodian workers or Indonesian workers here that we still have around here that, not supposed to be?
Yeah, I think there's
Like,
plenty.
how do we...
If I may tell you, you see, on the average, for every documented worker, there is one undocumented worker in Malaysia, on the minimum, at the minimum. Some statistics put it higher. There is, I think, the FMM, Federation of Malaysian Manufacturing Statistics, that says for every one documented worker, there's almost 1.5 undocumented. So you're talking about 2 million documented workers, and you have at the minimum 2 million undocumented. You see, there are several issues. With these undocumented workers, they are in a very vulnerable condition. They are prone for exploitation. So what the government has done, and I think we commend the government for coming up with this regularization amnesty program, which unfortunately is going to end by the end of this month. So we do not know how many have registered. But if the numbers are 2 million, and some even put it as high as 4 million, for every one documented, there is 2 undocumented workers. This is according to one of the statistics given by the Ministry of Human Resources themselves. You can check that, where the minister actually said there are something like 4 million undocumented workers. That is a very huge number. So if they have not tracked, if this 3P program does not track that numbers, which is in like at least a 1-to-1, then we have to think seriously of extending that amnesty. So that's this vulnerability situation, that's this exploitation situation. Coming to your point, a very valid point that you raised about this issue about